Welcome to the Grandpa Channel. I'm Steve Harris, but my grandkids call me Rivers. Here we ask a simple question. What did life teach you the hard way? Because a lifetime reveals things you can't learn any other way. On this show, we sit down with people who've lived a little, stumbled a little, and learned a few things along the way. So pull up a chair, because what a lifetime reveals can steady another. Welcome to the Grandpa Channel. I'm Steve Harris. My friends and families call me Rivers. Today we have a guest that I've really been looking forward to talking to. And spoiler alert, he's my nephew. He is supremely talented. The name, yes. His name, drum roll please. This is in honor of you, Donovan. The drum roll. His name is Donovan Taylor, and he is a proud resident of Manhattan. Welcome to my world, to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. It's an honor. It's a privilege.
I've been really looking forward to it. Now, I just wanted to tell you, I've got in my hands right now, let's see if I can get it. Yeah. This is a book, and I'm going to have Donovan tell you a little bit about. It's called the Beatitude Project, and there's about a 20-page story that Donovan tells his story and why the Beatitude Project. But I wanted to maybe have you give us a little bit of information on the arc of your young life.
Yeah. Oh man, that's a big question. But I would say like you said, I live in New York City now, and I have like an interesting arc into where I've gone, why I'm here now. But I've always been into music. I've always been into art. I've always been into cities. I grew up outside of Chicago, and so in my adult years I knew I wanted to live in New York City, and we'll get into it, but I went through a period of mental illness that was really challenging. Then just music combined with that process has led me into kind of this unique career path of using music and art to kind of not only chronicle my journey with mental health, but also using it as like an outreach to help other people. So that's what I do right now. You were just referencing the book that we did called the Beatitude Project. I can talk about it more in a second, but yeah, it's a big project, and we've been lucky to turn it into a book form as well.
Tell us a little bit about your musical background and where you studied and a few things like that.
So my main instrument is the drums and percussion, as you said. Growing up in Chicago, that's like one of the first things I fell in love with were the drums. I did a lot of percussion and drumming. It's one of the first things I fell in love with. I learned piano, did some singing, playing in rock bands, and I've always been interested in classical music as well, and particularly jazz. And so I went to Brigham Young University, and I did percussion performance, and I especially did a lot of jazz with them. Got to cover the world. We did tours in Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, went to the Philippines, Australia. I feel super blessed to have done all of that. And then after I graduated, I had married my wife, and a week after we got married, we drove to New York City, and I did my master's in jazz studies at New York University, and then my wife studied as a physician assistant at Cornell, which the campus is in Manhattan. So we did both of our grad schools out here in New York, and we've just been here ever since. But since this is kind of tied into the mental health aspect, but when I moved out to New York, drumming was what I was mainly doing, but because of my mental health, it just like wasn't like a very good coping mechanism, because there's a lot of things involved in like perfectionism, and like you're constantly pushing yourself, and so drums actually wasn't really an outlet for me. Like with all my mental health issues, what actually was an outlet was composing and doing songwriting. And so I started doing a lot of composition courses at both BYU and at NYU. And it was just like incredibly therapeutic for me. And it was interesting, like being in New York, I'd start playing my pieces on concerts. And I was used to people coming up and being like, hey, I loved your drumming. But in New York, everybody was like, hey, your drumming's pretty good, but like I actually really liked the song you did, or I really like this composition. So, and then one of my professors told me, you were a really good drummer, but you have a lot of potential with writing music, and he was like, I'd really lean into that. And so that's kind of how I got into the path I'm at now, is I write music, we're doing these big projects, and drumming and classical music and jazz and all these things are kind of just part of it. They're kind of like, but I don't consider myself like a drummer as much anymore. I consider myself just an overall artist and almost like a project director who drums. Like drumming is kind of like my calling card, but that's something that was really influenced by my mental health, to be honest with you, just because that's where I found a lot of coping and healing was through composition.
Well, what you're saying really leans into the central question of why I do these podcasts. And one of the big questions is, what did life teach you the hard way? But I want to be even more specific with you. And I want to say, what have you learned from the hard way, from your mental health journey? And if you feel free to give as many or as little details as you'd like, Donovan.
Oh, that's a great question. I want to make sure I answer that well. I feel like there's so many lessons. It comes into the project. Beatitude is, I love that word. And when we hear beatitude, we think of beatitudes. And we think often, especially if you're religious, you think of the New Testament, chapter 5 of Matthew, when Christ, he lays out the beatitudes and he's like, blessed are the blank, for they shall be blank. But I really liked one in particular. It says, blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. And if you actually just look at the word beatitude itself, the definition of beatitude is supreme blessedness. And I love that because there's that kind of this dual nature to those scriptures, and also just that word is that, like, that whole time Christ is like, he's naming all these terrible things that can happen to you, but he's saying you're blessed. He's saying, and he gives you, and there's amazing things that happen because of those bad things that happen to you. And I feel like that's the theme of my life, but particularly just this project and my experience with mental health is it was the worst. You know, it's something like I would never wish on anyone, and I hope I never have to experience anything like that again. But I mean, mortality is mortality, life is life. At the same time, like, there's no way I'd be where I am now. There's no way I'd be doing any of the things I do now if it wasn't because of that experience. And so I'm probably going to talk a lot because this is like, there's a lot. Something I would say that, like, I learned the hard way is something that's come out of it. I don't know if this is the right phrase, but I feel like I earned my stripes. It kind of gives you, when you go through something hard, in a way, you kind of get authority because you can all of a sudden speak on a subject that if you didn't go through it yourself, nobody would take you seriously. No. And, like, I'll give you an example. Like, part of this project is me and my friend who plays violin. We went in Salt Lake and we played for like 6 hours straight in a county jail. We did 6 performances over 6 hours. And every time, like, a new set of prisoners would, like, come in, you know, and they'd see me. And especially with some of the male prisoners, they saw me and I had to be in, like, a white shirt and tie. And I kind of looked, I don't know, probably a little dorky. And I think I could see in their eyes, you know, just kind of like, who's this guy? Or who's this guy coming in to, like, preach to me or whatever? But then it was cool because when I, like, would share my story and I would explain to some of the depths that I've had to go, I could see that their, like, countenance would change. And it went from them being like, who's this guy, to, oh, we have a lot in common. And by the end of it, I felt like there was, like, almost like a brotherhood there. There was, like, a deep connection because we could look at each other eye to eye and say, like, hey, we've kind of both been to hell and back, you know? And I think there's no way years ago I could have walked into a prison and had that effect on somebody, you know, because I just didn't have the experience. I didn't have the, like I said, I don't know if that's the right word, but almost like that, like, authority. But because I've been through really hard things, it gives me perspective, it gives me empathy. I think it's put me in a much better position to help others. And it's a price you don't want to pay. You know, nobody wants to pay some of those prices, whether it's like losing a family member to death, sickness physically or sickness mentally. But that's the one benefit that I think comes out of it. There's many benefits, but one benefit is definitely your capacity to touch another person's heart. Your capacity to understand somebody is increased, like, exponentially as you go through your own suffering. So that's the first thing that's coming to my mind. I don't know. I hope that's
wonderful. I mean, I'd like to think that maybe we could just take an exam, you know, a written exam like we do in school, and somehow come up with wonderful qualities just from a written, doing well on a test. I take tests pretty good. Yeah. And, you know, but I have found at the advanced stage of 70 that that's not how things work. And if I think about the great lessons of life that I have learned, they've all come through very difficult times. There's no exception. And totally. I just think that, You've managed. How old are you now, Donovan?
I'm 31. I just turned 31.
But you've lived a lifetime in your
Yeah.
31 years, I think.
My mental health period was about 8 years. It was about like 8 years long when it was really, really bad. And like to
Mm.
just explain to the audience, I had suffered for years, but then it really climaxed in me being hospitalized after a suicide attempt. And then I really had to claw my way back into kind of regaining my life. And thanks to like therapy and medication, I've been able to achieve. And honestly, for me, God and a lot of divine intervention has been a huge part of it. But I feel like I've been able to get to a good place. But yeah, it came with a cost and it was a journey. But I do feel like I lived a long time in those 8 years. I feel like I went, and it's even weird thinking back to like who I was 6 years ago, and it feels like a completely different person. It's crazy. I just feel like it just feels like a lifetime ago, if that makes sense. And it was only like a few years ago. But that's a beautiful thing. I think when you really, I don't know, I feel very blessed and I feel lucky, and that's why I feel a moral obligation and also just a sincere desire to now use everything I have to help others who were in my situation, because it's painful, and I want to give back, because I've been given much, I too must give, as the hymn says. I had a thought too. I've been reading Chronicles of Narnia with my daughter lately, and it's a really beautiful. I'm sure many people who have listened have like watched the movies or at least have read or know of the Chronicles of Narnia. But like the main character's name is Aslan, and he's a lion, but he's symbolic of Jesus Christ throughout the whole stories. And there's just this beautiful part in the first book as I was reading with my daughter, and actually as we were reading aloud, I started crying. I had to have my wife finish because in the story there's this boy Diggory who his mother's dying, and he really wants Aslan to help his mother who's dying. And Aslan's interactions with him are just so tender and so beautiful. And at the end, though, you can see that this kid has almost accepted that like his mother's probably gonna die. But then Aslan says like basically is like that's not gonna happen, and like gives him what the boy needs to help heal his mother, and like gives a promise that his mother's gonna be healed. And I don't know, it's just and this beautiful interaction of like Aslan blessing this kid with actually what he wants. And I've been thinking about that in terms of life. I feel like things happen and it doesn't seem like a blessing, or we like get things that we don't want. But something I'm trying to remind myself, and this is from a spiritual perspective, is like I really believe that God is a giver of good gifts. He knows how to give good gifts, and he's not trying to like dupe us. He's not trying to like hurt us. And even when things seem like they're not what you want, it's a good gift. And in the end, like all he wants to do is bless us and help us to have what we truly need and what we truly want. And like I said, I feel like I'm saying this over and over again, but this whole thing with my mental health journey, it did not feel like a gift at all. It definitely felt like completely miserable, but it's crazy how actually it has been a huge gift. And the whole time I felt like I was being guided, and even now I feel like I'm being guided, and I'm just like standing back and just being like, wow, like, this was a gift, and God was like there for me the whole time. And sometimes I think to myself, I'm only 31. That's a lot of life left to live where things can go wrong. But I'm trying to remind myself, like, it's like Aslan, like, it's like he's a giver of good gifts. I try and remind myself that, like, no matter what happens, whether it's like injustices or unfairness or just pain, whatever happens in the future, I'm just always going to try and remember that, like, in the end, God's a giver of good gifts, and it's going to be a blessing in the end. It's kind of like, sorry, that's just been something I've been actually thinking about just the last few days since I was reading with my daughter, and it felt like it kind of related to what we were talking about.
Beautiful. Yeah. I'm going to ask you kind of a off the wall question, and it's because I've read, your story. But if you could maybe kind of talk about, I know this sounds odd, but your relationship with the George Washington Bridge, where it's at, why it plays, what was your relationship, what is your relationship now, which I thought was really beautiful, how you talked about that in your story.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. So for anybody that's listening that doesn't know very much about New York City, George Washington Bridge is one of the famous bridges of New York City. It connects Manhattan to New Jersey, and your daughter and her family and me, they used to live by the bridge, and I still currently live by the bridge. And the neighborhood we live in is called Washington Heights, and it's like George Washington Bridge is just a famous bridge in general, but especially for our neighborhood here in Manhattan, it's like a really important symbol that a lot of people connect to. But obviously, as you just mentioned, I have like a very special connection to it in both like difficult ways and in beautiful ways. George Washington Bridge is where the ambulance picked me up when I was trying to end things for myself, when I was like on my way to try and commit suicide. We were living in an apartment that was literally like at the footpath to get onto the bridge. And so like every day I saw the bridge right then and there. And I was suffering in a way that like, and this has given me new insight into suicide. Like I used to think it was like something you chose, and maybe that is still the case for some people, but when I was in my episode, I couldn't think straight, and all I knew is I was in a lot of pain. And it's like you can't, I remember everything just felt so fuzzy, and I just remember I had pain, and the only thought I could think of was I just like needed the pain to stop. I needed release somehow, and it got so bad to the point where it's like I didn't care how it came, and that's what I think leads a lot of people to that point of feeling like they need to end things permanently. But when I got to that point and I had run out of my apartment, and my angel wife, who is the most important character probably in my whole story, she chased after me and called the ambulance. And yeah, before I could do any serious damage, the ambulance was there and it picked me up. So for a while, to your point, the George Washington Bridge was like a really painful metaphor for me. Every time I saw it, I was like, I felt like, I don't know, it just brought up all those feelings and the emotions there. But then as I've healed and as I've worked on things, I've actually gotten to this point where it is my favorite place in New York City. I was just there today. I ran across it today with pushing my son in a stroller. It's become this symbol of how something could be so bad in my life and become so good. And now when I even go and I see the place where the ambulance picked me up, and I just think to myself, wow, what a miracle. Like how different my life is now. And just thanks to so many things that put me into a better place, I can now go on that bridge and I can do all these things. And it's not like I'm trying not to think about the hard things. It's actually that I just feel immense gratitude that I've been able to get to where I am. And the last thing I'll say on it is like the bridge is just such a beautiful metaphor because it's connecting two places. It's taking you somewhere, And I was just like, I love that thought that the bridge, like this whole process, has taken me somewhere else. It's taken me to a better version of myself, to a deeper, more empathetic version of myself. And so just the fact that where I almost died was a bridge just feels unintentionally poetic. Like I did not plan it at all, but it has very much become a very big symbol in my life. I see it every day. Like I said, I just ran across it to New Jersey and back, pushing my son in a stroller. And every time I'm there, I just feel peace because I'm like, wow, we conquered this. We figured it out. We got through it. So
it's kind of Rocky-esque a little bit when you think of, there should be some dramatic music in the background, of course, penned by you, and just the heroic nature of things. And, as I was reading the story in your book, I just was struck by the cast of heroes that you have had in your life. I mean, first and foremost, it's Jesus, obviously. But I mean, I think of your wife, Ray Lynn. I think of your mom and dad, who are both incredible people, and all the other people, therapists and psychiatrists and other people who have helped you along the way. I think it made me think about my life and, who the cast of heroes are in my life. But I love the fact that you've had these wonderful heroes who have, gone above and beyond the call of duty. It's the hero's journey with you. And I'm not suggesting that your life is over and you can just walk off sunset. Yeah. It makes me really think, and I'm quite biased. I'm your uncle, but I just think, what's next for you? What a wonderful thing. And there are reasons why you are talking to me in April of 2026. Have you thought about what lies ahead for you?
Yeah, I absolutely do, and I have big dreams, but I mean, definitely just like on a practical level, doing this project on bigger and bigger levels. Like I just said, we're doing a tour right now, so we played in Salt Lake and we did a big show. I just did a show this last weekend in Arizona. I go to Chicago to do the show in 4 weeks, and then we're doing Seattle, and we're going to actually add some extra dates. We're going to probably do Miami, maybe Boston. So we're just it's just expanding and growing, giving me a chance to go not only play my music to people, but just to be able to share this story, like this conversation we're having, and connect with people on deeper levels. So I think that's probably going to keep on expanding, hopefully on and on. But on like a spiritual level, the scripture that comes to my mind from the New Testament is I was talking to a friend once who, like, a bunch of our friends are kind of like losing faith and just not as interested in religion. And my friend was asking me, he was like, how do you feel about religion? And I was like, man, I feel like the blind man in the New Testament when Christ heals this blind man, and then afterwards he's being questioned and interrogated by the Pharisees, I think. And they're like, who is this person that did this to you? Like, you're lying. And I love his response. He's basically like, I don't know who this guy is. All I know is I couldn't see, and now I can see. Like, the evidence is there. And I feel like that's like my faith moving forward, is all I knew is I couldn't think straight. I wanted to die. I was like in total darkness, and I completely, like, I was in my own personal hell that I could not get out of. And now I'm fine. You know what I mean? And I'm not just fine. I feel blessed. I feel happy and joyful. And I know for a fact I didn't do that for myself. You know, like, I worked hard. I put my effort in. And to your point, I had a cast full of heroes, my wife especially, but my parents also especially. But I know whose hand saved me, you know? And so now, on a spiritual level moving forward, my whole goal is to align myself as perfectly as possible with anything he wants me to do. Mm-hmm. And I feel like as long as I am constantly asking myself this question spiritually of, like, what would God want me to do in this situation? I feel like I can't go wrong. And that's kind of what I'm building my career off of right now, is just using any talent I have to be able to touch the hearts of any of his children or all of his children. And that's going to be probably for the rest of my life, is going to be my life mission, is just how many people can I bless, because I know who blessed me and I know what it feels like to suffer. And so that's the spiritual thing. But practically, I have a lot of ideas, and we're already doing this project, and I can't say all of the ideas, but watch out in the next few years.
I think it's fantastic. I attended your Salt Lake concert and I was blown away. I didn't get a chance to talk to you. There were scads of people talking to you after.
It was a long line. It was great, but thank you.
Fun. But I loved it, and I was just so impressed. And now I know a lot more kind of the story surrounding things, and it makes it even more impressive. If, let's say that someone's watching this and they're, say, 28 years old. I like the number 20. And a 28-year-old watching this, what would you like he or she to take away from watching this?
I'll answer it both spiritually and non-spiritually, depending on, like, who this person is. But on a spiritual level, I would say just trust God, and just trust, like I said earlier in the podcast, that God is a giver of good gifts. And no matter what you're going through or whatever you will go through, just know that if you're doing the right things and you're putting your trust where you're supposed to go, it's going to end up well. And I'd say, like, from a non-spiritual standpoint, something similar, just know that you're not alone. Know that there is hope. I was hospitalized for about a week after my attempt. I was diagnosed, and which was huge for me. I had no idea what I was dealing with. And then all of a sudden they were like, this is what you're dealing with. And they put me on this track with therapy, and they gave me this book. And the intro to the book was, like, basically saying, like, people say that people with this diagnosis, like, are going to have a really hard life and things are going to be miserable and, like, it's not changeable or things like that. But then they said, like, the last line of the introduction was basically like, that's not true. Like, you can find peace, and you can find, like, there are ways to manage this. And they just basically said there's hope. And they were like, so turn the page and let's get started. And I remember just reading that, and just somebody telling me there was hope made all the difference. So whether you're faith-based or whether you don't believe in God at all, but if you're going through a hard time, I guess what I'm trying to say is just, like, there is absolutely hope. And even if the lights aren't on in your life, you can at least turn that light on inside of yourself of hope. Because even just that little bit of light, even just that little decision within yourself to just trust that there's a dawn coming, that the morning is going to come, if you can just turn that little light on, like, that will be what makes the difference in the long run. And so that's what what I'd say. There's always hope. And if you are religious, like, just trust that God's going to be there in the end, and he's not going to leave you alone. Right?
Donovan, In your life, when do you feel the most alive?
It's interesting in a way. Like I feel like I'm almost two people, and I'm sure a lot of people feel like this in their careers. But like for example, I just played in Arizona, and we played to this crowd, and it was so exciting. And we made all these great contacts, and I really felt my story was able to bless people, and I felt very alive. But then it's interesting coming home, and I'm a dad, and I'm a husband, and my
Yeah.
kids don't care about my show. Don't care about they don't care about anything. They just know that they want to feel loved by me. And so it's interesting, like going from those two, I'm getting all this attention, to my kids need all the attention. And the thing is, I feel very alive in both of those places. But being a father, especially, I would say, has been what helps me feel alive. And they're one of the biggest reasons I've worked as hard as I have to get to a good place. And so, yeah, being a father is the best, as I'm sure you can attest. I love kids.
It gets better too, I would say. And, you're obviously at an age where grandkids are long into the future, but it even gets better with grandkids, which is, it's something really to look forward to. This is a tough question, but do you have like a one steady sentence in your mind and in your soul that reflects what life has taught you? And what would that sentence be? That's a tough one.
Yeah, I think I'll, I'll say this. The word that and the word that comes into my mind, and this is kind of a roundabout way of answering this, but I've I have a word, and I know Emily, your daughter, she was one of the first people that told me about like every year she chooses a word or something like that to like base her life or like that year on. But there is a word that comes back and back, like keeps on coming back into my mind and into my life. And actually, just last night, I was writing a pitch we're doing something with the project, and I really need to impress somebody. And I was writing a pitch of my life, but also the project. And this word came, and the word is unbreakable. My first experience with mental health hit when I was as a missionary for my church, serving in Peru, and that was the first time my symptoms ever hit, and it was incredibly disorienting. It's in my book, you probably read it, but anyways, it was a terrible experience. But the word that kept on coming into my mind was like, unbreakable, and being unbreakable, and learning what makes you unbreakable. It's not just about being tough, it's about getting up again after every time you get knocked down, and trusting in the right sources. But I feel like that's the word I try and live by, is like, no matter what life hands me, no matter the trials that come, I try and be unbreakable. I try and be resilient, and just like keep on getting up, because life is worth fighting for, and helping others is worth fighting for. And I think that's like kind of my mantra, is to just try and be unbreakable through the whole
I love that.
process.
How would you characterize what's the origin of your unbreakableness, which you've learned from over, all of these mental health experiences, especially? What's the source of your strength?
Well, okay, once again, two answers. So spiritual is definitely Jesus Christ, right? Like there is no way, like I said, I could do any of the things I'm doing if I didn't have my faith. The other answer, this is kind of interesting, but there's this book about mindfulness, and mindfulness and meditation is something that was actually super crucial in my healing process. And there's a book called by John Kabat-Zinn, I think is his name.
Oh, I know who. Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
He's the big champion of like mindfulness in the last decade probably, and he has a book called Wherever You Go, There You Are, and he's talking about different types of meditation and some like imagery you can like use as you meditate. And there was like he had like mountain meditation, and it was like water meditation. And mountain meditation, if you're like meditating, and like I know this sounds kind of like otherworldly, but like if you're imagining a mountain, you might feel strong. But then he was talking about water, and he was saying like water meditation, you would almost think maybe is weak, right? You would think, oh, water's not as strong as rock. But he like brought up this thing that I thought was so interesting, that rocks break, mountains break, but water doesn't break. It's malleable. I don't know if that makes sense, but I've been thinking about that as I get older. I thought being unbreakable, I thought being resilient and strong was being tough, just like gritting it out. But I've actually learned, I feel like being unbreakable is like being more like water, being able to adjust and to fluctuate and just like maintain calm and composure and ride the waves. I didn't get through my mental health process by just being stubborn, you know what I mean? Or by being, just like, oh, tough guy. I got through my whole journey with my mental health by being teachable and being humble and being
Yeah.
willing to be broken down and rebuilt and be willing to adjust and change things about myself so I could grow. And so I would say, like, I don't know how we got to this point, but that's something that, like, having that imagery of being malleable and like almost like a liquid state is like something that meditative wise for some reason really works for me.
I think that's a great answer. My observation too is that it's easy to say I'm going to submit my will to God's will. It's much harder to actually do it. I
Oh,
seem to
totally.
have conflicting ideas than God about what needs to happen and when it needs to happen. And I think that you mentioned, I think that there's incredible power in humility and meekness that is vastly underrated. And what I hear candidly when I hear you tell your story is that there's these wonderful elements of humility and submission and meekness that are just they're so powerful, Donovan, that I tip my hat to you. And I think that whatever you do, if you make sure that you're guided by God, it's going to be fantastic. So let me just kind of finish up with the question I warned you about. What's your superpower?
I'd say my superpower is my heart has widened and my drive to help is intense. I have a fire that is unquenchable to help others. And there is a scripture that I'll reference that in this scripture this prophet is given a vision to see all of the events of history. And his heart is both overjoyed but also broken because of some of the things he has to see. And at the end, it's such an interesting description. It says that his heart stretched wide as eternity. And I love this thought of a heart stretching as wide as eternity. And I'm not claiming that my heart has stretched as wide as eternity. I'm not to that point yet. But the experiences I've been through and the brokenness and then learning how to be unbreakable, that whole process has really stretched my heart and put into me a deep sense of empathy and sympathy for people. And like I said, just this fire. Like, it used to be I'd see somebody sad and I'd be like, oh, I want to help. But now when I see people suffering, it's like, I will do anything I can. I will move like heaven and earth to do what I can to help those in need. And so I think, I don't know if it's a talent or a superpower as much as it's just grit. Like, I just feel like something's changed in me where I will stop at nothing to try and help others, especially when it comes to some of the things I'm working on right now with like mental health. So, I mean, similar to you of just kind of showtime, it's game time. And that's how I feel. I feel like I'm only 31 and I've learned a lot of lessons and it's now time to get to work.
We've talked about kind of the hero's journey, but I want you to know it sounds a little kind of goofy, but I want you to know that you're one of my heroes.
Thank you.
And I just really admire what you've been through and what you want to do to help people, and I'm just grateful for you. And I think I just really have enjoyed this opportunity to sit down and talk with you. And God bless you. And
Thank you,
thank you
Rivers.
for coming on.
I love you, man.
I love you.
I wish I could give you a hug, but we're across the country from each other.
Yeah. How can people know about your project and the book? And we want to help in any way that we possibly can.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the easiest way to follow the journey is just follow me on Instagram, Donovan Taylor Music. And the best way you can support is also just listen to the album on anywhere you're streaming. The album is called Beatitude and it's under the name Donovan Taylor. So anywhere you listen to music, you can listen to music there. But yeah, if you follow me on Instagram and if you're listening to my music, then you'll know about shows coming up. Like I said, we're playing in Chicago, Seattle, Los Angeles, Hackensack, New Jersey, and New York City. That's the next few months. And like I said, we're adding some dates to probably Miami, maybe Georgia, Boston. So what I'm trying to say is if you follow me, you'll see some of these dates coming up and you'll be able to come see us. And if you want a book or anything like that, we actually just sold out of our first batch as of the last few days. Thank you. But we are printing more. And so there's plenty to go around. So if you want to learn more about the project, reach out to me or just follow me on Instagram and catch us at a show. And I also have to give a shout out too. Such a big part of the whole project is Ty Meekum, your son-in-law. Emily's husband. He does all the photography for it, and he helped with all the interviews. And I just want to shout out Ty really quick, that he's one of the most talented people I know. I'm so grateful to have his insight and artistry in the project has been invaluable. So I'm so grateful for him.
Well, you have a great rest of your day. Are you back in New York right now?
I'm back in New York, yes. I'm on dad duty.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks again, Donovan, and thanks for listening to the Grandpa Channel. That's it for today's episode of the Grandpa Channel. If something you heard made you laugh, pause, or see life a little differently, pass it along. We're gathering the lessons people learned the hard way, the stories, the second thoughts, and the wisdom that only comes with time. And we'd love to hear yours. What did life teach you the hard way? Until next time, keep the perspective honest and the stories coming. I'm Rivers, and I'm out of here.